Hello, welcome back to the latest episode of You Are My Boro. Myself, Dom Short, and Scott Wilson, both of the Northern Echo. You've dried out, Scott. You had a
dried out, yeah. Welcome to the English summer. So I was on a day off yesterday, and I had tickets for about 6 months. I don't know when they first went on sale for England Pakistan, the first T20 at Headingley. Really looking forward to it. Nice night at the cricket. Few beers round Leeds, Headingley beforehand. Sure enough, there was a few beers round Leeds and Headingley, but there was no cricket.
probably more beers than what you initially.
Yeah, that was exactly it. Yeah, suddenly a day of kind of hanging around waiting for the official call off, which was the most inevitable thing in the world ever. But well, it'd be rude not to have a couple of beers and see what Leeds has got to offer, wouldn't it?
Ever You Are My Boro professionals shaking off the hangover to make sure we go ahead.
Exactly.
The day after.
We're all right.
Thanks again to those who joined us in the live vid last week and got involved. As we discussed last week, we're going to do a few more of them over the course of the summer. So we'll give you a heads up on here and on socials when they're planned. But do just get involved with the comments in all our videos, because we do keep note of them. And if there's anything that you want discussing, then we can make sure we discuss them on future episodes. We've had the return. It's that kind of stage of the summer, isn't it, where not an awful lot happens really.
Yeah.
But we've had the retained list last week. Maybe one slight surprise. Paddy McNair has gone, which we knew about. We'll come on to that. Liam Roberts has moved on, which again was kind of always obviously going to be the case when he joined Barnsley. The one slight surprise is Jamie Jones could potentially get a new deal. Now, we discussed the keeper department last week, and we said at that stage that Jones was likely to move on because he was absent from the last few squads. Well, the reason he was absent, we've now discovered, is the fact he had a shoulder injury, which Boro say he's going to stick around at Rockcliffe to get treatment on, and then with a view to potentially signing an extension. We'll go into that, because what we're going to do today on the back of that is, and ahead of the summer, is kind of do a department breakdown of each position and see where Boro are at, how strong or weak they are in certain areas, and where they might need to strengthen. In goal is probably where there's question marks because of the return of Bryn and Hemming, and we'll get on to them. But let's start with Jones. Can you understand the thinking behind giving an experienced goalkeeper like that another contract if he's happy to continue his role?
Yeah, I think I can, in that, you know, we look at the goalkeeper position and look at who's starting and who's the sub on a match day. Well, they're your two keepers. Now, obviously, within a training group, you need a third keeper. You know, you need that extra body to joining in games, joining in training sessions, joining in drills, obviously be there if anyone's injured, etc., etc. Jones has obviously done that job last season. Carrick obviously thinks he's done it well enough. He's obviously a valued member of the group. He's experienced. You know, you would imagine he's actually probably a bigger presence and character within that group than his kind of status as a third choice keeper would maybe make you think, if you know what I mean. So for all of those reasons, I guess it's a case of, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And if he's willing to do that job for another year and accept that his chances of any kind of first team football will be extremely limited unless injuries start piling up in that department, then I guess it's not always the easiest position to fill that, in that, you know, a younger keeper would be more ambitious, will be wanting to play. So it's probably got to be someone coming towards the end of their career, almost a coach who isn't a coach, if you know what I mean. And so Jones clearly fits that bill for him. So, you know, I don't think we should read into this that he's going to be knocking on the door and having a realistic chance of beating Boro's first choice, even second choice keeper next season, because I don't think that's the position we're in. But in terms of the job he's doing within that training group, Carrick obviously values it.
And with Bryn and Hemming, who we've already talked about at length this summer, but I have a feeling it's going to be one of those that we talk about for a few more weeks to come yet, because it is an obvious talk.
There's nothing else going on.
Yeah, I was going to try and get around it, but that's the point. Bryn, to repeat what we've said in recent weeks and what we'll say again next week, Bryn's obviously come back from an impressive loan at Leyton Orient, was at Swindon before that. Zach Hemming's come back from St Mirren. Who he's had 3 years in Scotland now, and St Mirren, he's had a good season. St Mirren have had a good season. Now, Previously, their boss, Stephen Robinson, had made it clear he wanted to re-sign him. He's now confirmed that that won't be the case. Interestingly, saying that Zach is going to have the chance to come back and be Boro's number 2 next season. Now, before we get into kind of what that might mean, the point with Bryn and Hemming really is it's unlikely that either of them are going to be number 1 next season. If they're not going to be number 2, you may as well send them out on loan again, or even if you don't see them breaking in the future, sell them. At this stage of the career, there's no point in them being a 3rd choice keeper, is there?
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. Which is why, as I said, Jamie Jones is at the period of his career where being a 3rd choice keeper is kind of okay, it's fine. You know what I mean? He's obviously settled for that, and it's a route into coaching potentially for him. Bryn and Hemming are trying to kind of carve out a career for themselves, aren't they, and establish themselves. So, you know, there's an argument to be had about how much value is there in being a number 2, or is it better for them to be going out on loan? But that's a debate, and Boro need a good, experienced number 2 who's ready. No, sorry, not necessarily experienced. A good number 2 who's ready to go in if anything happens to the number 1. But there's absolutely no point in them being there as the number 3 and not even being in and around matchday squads and everything. So I think by the end of this summer, by the end of this window, we'll probably know what Boro feel the kind of long-term prospects for Bryn and Hemming are. You know, do they see either of those goalkeepers being their number 1 in the next couple of years? Well, if they do, then they really need to be number 2 next season, don't they? And I know Tom Glover's there, and we'll get into that. Will he still be at Boro come the end of the transfer window? It's starting to feel like that's not necessarily nailed on. Clearly, a bit of that will depend on what happens with Dieng. I think whatever happens, Michael Carrick wants Senny Dieng to be his number 1 at the start of next season. Who then is number 2? Now, there has been rumours of Premier League interest in Dieng. So if that happens and he leaves, then it's a completely different situation. But assuming Dieng stays and he's Boro's number 1, is Bryn the number 2? Is Hemming the number 2? Or does Glover stay and is number 2? And then, like you say, it feels like that's probably a point where you've made your decision really on Bryn and Hemming. So it's okay, well, are we going to sell them? Are we going to loan them? What's happening? It's a bit like the situation with Ainsley Pears, isn't it? Where you always felt that there was a keeper there who Boro felt at some stage would be good enough. And he subsequently proved that he is a championship goalkeeper. But the timing was just never really right with Boro. And you do wonder whether that might end up being a bit like that with Bryn and Hemming. I think it would be a shame because certainly, on the evidence of the loan spells, they're both potentially championship keepers, not very much further down the line. So it would feel a bit of a waste for Boro to have kind of put so much into the development and then not actually benefit from that. But the reality of this situation is that they're not both going to be there as, they can't both be number 2 next season, can they? So one of them, at least, I would think, is either going to be loaned out again or sold because it doesn't do their career any good whatsoever to be sat at Boro as number 3 or 4.
Well, if Glover stays, then clearly they're both almost certainly probably go out on loan again. They've both got 2 years left on the contract. Yeah. So with Bryn, the obvious next step would be a championship loan after impressing in League 2 and League 1. With Hemming, the obvious next step would probably be a championship or certainly top-end League 1 club, but probably championship as well after impressing in Scotland with St Mirren this year. And then on the back of it, I know they'll be going into the last 12 months of the deal, but then Boro in a position where they've seen what these players are capable of in the championship. And they'll either be in a good position to move them on or, right, we know that they're ready. If Hemming or Bryn, if Michael Carrick clearly feels that Hemming or Bryn are ready now to be given the chance to be number 2, then now probably is the right chance to move Tom Glover on, isn't it?
Because that's the way it feels like to me, that would almost feel like the more sensible thing because, as we've said on a number of these vids, Glover did have a chance this season. He certainly didn't disgrace himself, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure that he showed enough in that spell to suggest that you would want him as your full-time permanent number 1. And ultimately, you have to feel like that with your number 2, because if something happens to your number 1, then there's a chance that they might be your number 1 for the whole of the season. Do you know what I mean? So that feels to me like it's probably the likeliest scenario, that Dieng starts the season as number 1, Glover leaves, and one of Breen or Hemming steps up to be the number 2, and the other one is back out on loan.
We'll move forward into the defence then. Paddy McNair's exit, which we all knew was coming before McNair's confirmation, which came the day after the Watford game, leaves Boro with 4 senior centre halves in Vandenberg, Fry, Lenihan, and Clark.
Yeah,
is that enough? Do you expect any movement there? I mean, if you start the season with those 4, that's sound, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that is enough when you've also got fullbacks who, at a push, could play as a centre half. You know what I mean? Lucas Engel could play as a centre half. Tommy Smith, when he's fit, could play as a centre half. Luke Ayling, if he re-signs, if you had to, could play as a centre. You know, Johnny Howson can play as a centre half. So I think that is enough. Clearly, the wild card in amongst that is there an offer for Rav Vandenberg that Boro can't turn down this summer? Then all of a sudden, that's a completely different discussion then, because not only are you light on numbers, but you've lost probably the best out of the 4 of them already. I would say that Vandenberg's getting towards that point. So yeah, assuming Vandenberg stays, I can't see centre half being a priority position for Boro at the moment, unless they feel that the time is right to move maybe a Dale on or someone like that. But it doesn't, those soundings, you're not hearing those soundings. So at the moment, I think that those 4 would be the 4.
What would be interesting is, and we haven't seen this, and this is a case of various positions, really. We talked about it with Marcus Forss and Isaiah Jones. What would be interesting is if you're playing the flat back 4 and all 4 of them are fit, who's your first choice pairing? Because I dare say it's Vandenberg, and
I think so, yeah. And I think if you were picking it tomorrow, it would be Vandenberg and Clark. Now, that's not to say that if Fry and Lenihan have a full pre-season and do well in those games, that will necessarily be the case. But I think Michael Carrick at the moment would say, I'll happily go into next season starting Rav Vandenberg and Matt Clark at centre-half, because, it's looked pretty good in the last month or so.
Which is a great position to be in, really, because Darrell Lenihan was rock solid, wasn't he, the season prior. Dale Fry, we know when he's on song how good he can be at this level. So if you go into the season with those 4, you're pretty well stocked there.
Yeah, that feels like as good as pretty much most championship teams can reasonably aspire to be, doesn't it? And you've got a nice blend, haven't you? You've got the experience, you've got the bright young thing who could be a superstar, you've got the dependable kind of homegrown guy in Dale. So yeah, I think that ticks more to the boxes that you'd want ticking in terms of centre halves.
On the subject of Matt Clark, I was walking down Gisborough High Street last week, and a Lawrence Jackson student looked over at me and said, "Look, it's Matt Clark."
There you go.
God.
There you go.
Yeah, which is it's probably more of an insult to Matt Clark than it is me, obviously.
Possibly.
Right back, Luke Ayling is going to come in and join Tommy Smith. 2 senior options there. I guess the only slight question mark there is Tommy Smith's got to get back fully fit. You don't know how he's going to react. You don't know how he's going to react to a long-term injury like that, the first he's had of his career. At left back, Boro have options. Luke Thomas has gone back to Leicester, not going to sign on a permanent deal. Boro have options in Engel and Bangura, but we've touched on this in recent weeks. Still maybe question marks there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think Carrick and Boro would like to see what Bangura is really capable of if he has 3 months of uninterrupted football and, he's playing week in, week out and stays fit, because he never really got a spell like that all season, did he? And yet, when he was fit, it felt like he was probably where Carrick would like to go. And his kind of mobility and attacking threat feels like a good foil to Ayling on the other side, and is almost getting back down, dare we say it, to the kind of setup when Ryan Giles was bombing down there a couple of seasons back. So, I mean, you missed Dykesdale off there, who I think probably might well go this summer, don't you?
Oh yeah, we'll come back to Dykesdale.
You know, I could see. It feels like that Michael Carrick's kind of made his mind up with Anthony Dykesdale, and you know, yes, he's there, he's an option, but he's pretty low down the pecking order now. I think Boro would probably listen to offers there. Assuming
that's the thing with Dykesdale, because Dykesdale can play right back, can play centre back, can play right wing back. But even this season, when Boro have been down to the bare bones at times, he didn't get the chance. And I know like that you can't judge him on that Leeds game really. I think it was his first game in 4 months. He was up against Somerville, but that wasn't the first time he'd been given a chance and didn't take it. The Rotherham game comes to mind a year earlier. I mean, it's it'd be more of a surprise if Dykesdale was still at Boro come the end.
Yeah, it's felt like for most of the season that Carrick's kind of been looking for a reason not to pick him than a reason to pick him, doesn't it? So I think as long as, assuming Ayling signs, and Ayling and Smith, you've got two, and again, assuming Smith gets back fit, you've got two options there, which are rock solid, steady, reliable right backs. I think Bangura's the more interesting kind of one at left back, because I think there's a little bit of a chance that we haven't quite seen exactly what he's capable of. But I do think that probably of all the defensive positions, left back's probably the one where you could imagine Boro look at it and thinking, well, okay, maybe there's better out there. Maybe there's. I mean, the fact that they wanted, and I know that there were injury issues, which was part of the reason that they went for Luke Thomas. But the fact that they wanted to bring in Luke Thomas, and the fact that Thomas played at times when Engel and Bangura, certainly one of them, occasionally both of them, were fit, certainly suggests that it's an area that Carrick's looking at thinking, yeah, maybe there's better options out there. Maybe that is somewhere we can improve.
I think with the left back, it might well come down to what Boro have seen and think Engel and Bangura can be, because I don't think we've seen enough of either of them to say for sure Boro are fine there. With Engel, you're almost in danger of because his start was so poor, because he struggled so much to start with. You're almost in danger of kind of overstating what followed.
Yeah,
what
I know what you mean.
Was actually probably like okay.
Yeah.
Is that enough with Bangura? Like you said, it's the unknown of, we haven't seen him with a spell. We haven't seen him have a long spell in the side, really.
No. And
Bangura clearly came in as second choice.
You just get the feeling that Carrick likes him, that Carrick thinks there's a player there that can develop and improve, and we haven't seen the best of him.
Yeah, watch this space on that one. I think it'll be interesting to see how that develops. Let's move into midfield. Lewis O'Brien, who's obviously gone back to Nottingham Forest after his loan. Boro won't be making that one permanent. Johnny Howson signed his new contract. Hayden Hackney will be fully fit for the start of pre-season. Dan Barlass is there as well. Law McCabe obviously had a great breakthrough this season, made his full debut in the final day win over Watford. But it's still a big ask to ask McCabe to break in and be a regular next season. It's a priority for Boro, an early priority for Boro to bring someone in.
Yeah.
If and when that someone comes in, do you expect that to be the four? The obvious question mark here is Hackney, isn't it?
Yeah. At various stages last season, it was starting to feel inevitable that big bids would come in for Hayden Hackney this summer, and he would probably be off. I still think there's a chance that might happen. That said, he's obviously had the injury. He hasn't barely kicked a football in the second half of the season. Clubs will have other priorities. Is it less likely now that big bid comes in for him? Maybe. So let's work on the assumption that Hackney stays. Then I think if Hackney stays, Hackney, Howson, Barlassa and Ian Other will be the Boro's quartet in there. And again, it's an area of the field where if you needed to, you could shoehorn other players in there in a different system. I'm not saying necessarily if you're sticking with a kind of 4-2-3-1, but if you went to a 4-3-3, then a McGree could play as a narrower central midfielder if you needed him. There are options there. So I think it would be they'd be your four, assuming Hackney stays, and obviously Boro bringing in another centre midfielder, which we already know is a priority.
And we've talked about, we know they want a different type of midfielder in there. Now, I know we've talked about this. Johnny Howson's still quite unique in the squad in what he offers. Is it a 6? Is it a 6 Boro need? A bit, someone, kind of a box-to-box destroyer. I know the days of a Claude Makelele, someone who just sits and shields.
Yeah.
I know that's doing a disservice to Makelele, clearly, but you know what I mean? That's gone. A 6 offers more these days. But is it that type of player, you think?
It feels like that's the type of player that Boro need and will be looking for, because, you know, as we've said on previous vids and as we've said throughout the season, where if or when Johnny Howson is unavailable, it does still feel like Boro are scrambling around a little bit, trying to put a square peg into a round hole and not really providing the kind of protection you'd like to for the defence and all of that. So, yeah, I think in terms of that central midfield position, it will at least be someone who has, you know, the defensive side of their game is one of their key strengths. I think that's the kind of player we're talking about.
What about Dan Barlaser then? Because he came in January last year. I've just looked there. He's made 29 starts in that time. But if you take the 3 now, without knowing who else is coming in, if you take Howson, Hackney and Barlaser, everyone's fit. Hackney and Howson start. Yeah. If someone else come in, you'd imagine that's going to nudge Barlaser further down the pecking order. Now, he didn't come in to be that sort of player. There were real high hopes for him when he came in, wasn't he? Michael Carrick is a big fan, pushed for his signing. He'd been the key man in a struggling Rotherham team. We all saw, read, heard about the assists stats and what have you that he brought. Yeah. And yet he's always felt like he's just been on the fringes. Really, there's no signs that that's going to change.
Not really. Not really. I mean, you know, again, the fact that for the most of the last 2 months of the season, it was Lewis O'Brien who was getting the nod regularly in there, generally ahead of Barlaser, kind of says quite a bit, I think, doesn't it? That, you know, he's a more than useful squad player, but you struggle to see a scenario where if Boro are you know, genuinely serious about being proper top 6 contenders, maybe even pushing towards the top 2, is Dan Barlaser going to be in that starting lineup in that side? It still feels like probably not, and that's maybe a bit harsh on him because, you know, there have been good performances in there. I think he's a squad player, and you know, will he be content being a squad player, or will there come a time where he thinks, do you know what, this isn't really working out in the way that I envisaged it to, and you know, maybe something will happen. I think at the moment, you've got to keep hold of him as a Boro because, as we've said, it's probably the area of the pitch where you're lightest on numbers, full stop. Let's see what happens. If new players come in, then maybe that changes. But yeah, I mean, if you said to me now that we'd be having this video next summer and Dan Barlaser will have started 34 matches, I'd be surprised, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I think the frustrating thing with Barlaser is there's been some top performances. Was it the Sheffield Wednesday game that you were at?
Yeah.
When he won the show? I remember
and he was very, very good then. Very, very good. But, you know, it felt like he was afforded the freedom of central midfield that day. And that's when he's at his best, isn't it? When he's got time, have a little look around, get his head up, thread a pass through. That's where Dan Barlaser's at his best. It's in the hurly-burly of some championship matches, particularly against the better and the bigger sides. Does it all happen just a little bit too fast for him? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's been a bit harsh, but that will be my reading of it, I think.
Isaiah Jones and Marcus Forss are 2 good options on the right.
Yeah.
When you look at everyone being fit, and I know we touched on this again, like we said about the defenders. What we didn't really see this season was Carrick having to choose between both fully fit.
Yeah, and you tend to focus on the last month or so, don't you? And kind of, you know, A, because it's recency bias, and B, because Boro obviously had one of their best spells of the season then. But actually, when Forss was having that kind of purple patch for a month or so, he looked a really good player again. And you kind of forget how good a player he is, and actually how effective Carrick's made him look in that position on the right-hand side. Now, he's a very different wide right player than Isaiah Jones. Jones, you know, still to a large extent is almost your throwback winger, isn't he? He's a dribbler, he's direct, force more powerful, will come inside more, probably likely to score more, better eye for goal, I'd say. So different options, but two really good options, I think, at championship level.
With Jones, it's great to see him back at something like his best this season. Obviously got the reward of his new contract. What you'd probably want from him next season is more in terms of goals and assists, like you touched on there. But both Force and Jones, what they both are is outlets, aren't they? Both real outlets down the right. On the left side, well, Finners has played a lot of football on the left. Whether he'll play on the left or as 10 next season, we'll see. Obviously, there's Sammy Silvera. We'll get to him. But Riley McGree, first of all, clearly key major player when he's fit. But there's a question mark over his contract. He's moving into the last year. And it feels like that uncertainty will have to be resolved one way or another before the start of the season.
Yeah, there's been bits of whispers about McGree, hasn't there? About, you know, largely around the contract situation, you know, and yeah, I think one thing that the kind of new regime, if you like, at Boro or the new way they're doing things, they're very, very strong on is they don't want to get into the scenarios that Boro seem to have been in countless times in the past, where 6 months left on a deal and you're scrambling around trying to protect an asset. So, you know, Carrick was asked on a few occasions, wasn't he, about kind of McGree's contract situation, and generally always said, look, you know, it's just part of the ongoing thing. These conversations take place all the time. It's, you know, it's nothing. You never got the impression of him that there was close to being a resolution there and that things were moving. So if that doesn't change this summer, then I don't think Boro would want to go into the final year of Riley McGree's contract with a new deal either not really being close or almost the suggestion that wasn't going to happen. Because then I think probably at a point where this is your opportunity to sell for the best possible price. You know, his value will drop significantly if you get to January and he's heading into the last 6 months of his deal, won't it?
And Boro are already in a position where they need to strengthen in that area.
Yeah.
Morgan Rogers and Matt Crooks both went in January. I know Finners came in, but now Sam Greenwood has gone back to Leeds. Boro need at least one in there, don't they? A number 10, a fluid forward who can play off the left or as a 10.
Yeah. Yes. You know, because like you say, I think Azaz was at his best as a 10. And I think that's probably where moving forward, he will play his best football for Boro. But that number 10, probably more left than right, as you say, position is definitely somewhere where they need to strengthen this summer. Because as you pointed out, they've lost Rogers, they've lost Crooks, they've allowed Greenwood to go back. So, you know, there's three players who played a lot of football in that area of the pitch at various stages last season who you haven't got anymore. So, yeah, that's definitely a priority position.
And up front, again, we've touched on this in previous videos, particularly on the back of the comments from Latte Lath's agent in the Italian media a couple of weeks ago. But clearly, Boro are determined to and are confident of keeping hold of Latte Lath this summer. That there's no suggestions that there'll be any questions there, really. I know there's the inevitable speculation after a striker in the Championship has form, but everything points to Latte Lath still being a Boro player at the start of next season. Josh Coburn will want to put the frustration of this season behind him. Two options there, both options who've shown at times this season they can be more than effective in the Championship, but clearly bringing in a centre forward is a priority.
Yeah. A massive one, you know, and it has been for the last couple of windows, hasn't it? And I think Boro have, you know, in fairness to Boro and Kieran Scott and the rest of the team around him, they know that. January, there were excuses. It's always difficult to sign strikers in January. They didn't want to pay over the odds. I fully understand that. But this is their opportunity to do that deal now, and it will happen this summer. Now, what type of striker, as we kind of talked about when I think it was the last vid, is interesting because for most of last season, it felt like Boro had to bring in a number 9 who could lead the line and score goals. Well, all of a sudden now they've got that in Latalath. You know, that's what he's been excelling at in the last couple of months of the season. So, do you bring in another number 9, you know, a Latalath Mark II, and say, right, the pair of you fight it out to see who's going to be our number 1 striker and may the best man win? Or do you now look at it and think, well, okay, Latalath actually might be as good as you're going to get in the Championship. What type of a forward would dovetail with him and might make him better? And that then potentially becomes more of a number 10, more of a creator. Now, I think that type of player is really hard to get at Championship level. You know, a goal-scoring number 9 is difficult to get, but that kind of really incisive, really creative number 10, you don't get a lot of them in the Football League, do you? They tend, if they're any good, they tend to be Premier League players pretty quickly. So I think that, you know, I can see the appeal in doing that rather than going out and signing someone who's going to be very similar to Latalath and probably couldn't play together in the same team unless Carrick really changes formation. But maybe that's the way they'll end up going, because trying to get that really, you know, creative, incisive number 10 is not easy in the Championship.
I wonder whether Latalath's form just gives Boro the freedom and leeway to sign a striker who might be deemed more to have potential to become a star, rather than expect them to come in and hit the ground running straight away. You look up the road at Sunderland, for example. They are desperately in need of a striker who comes in and who starts and is their main man as a number 9. Boro are in a slightly different position on the back of Latalath's finish to the season. Boro were linked with Will Lancashire from Tottenham a couple of weeks ago. Now, we know he's a player who Boro have watched last season. This week, I think he's just been named as Premier League 2 Player of the Season, actually. Tottenham won the league stage, I think. Now, our understanding is that Boro were kind of in a position where they weren't sure at that stage whether they were ready to make a move this summer. Things like that might well depend on what other interest there is. I guess it might be like Finn Azaz, when external interest from other clubs kind of forced Boro's hand in January. But I just wonder whether that profile, that type of player at this stage of his career, offers an insight into what Boro might be looking for in a centre forward this summer.
You could definitely imagine it, because like you said, you know, you turn the clock back to January, February time, and we would have been saying whoever comes through that door will start the season for Boro, because Latalath and Coburn, we haven't seen enough from them. They haven't been doing it. Well, that's not the situation anymore. So, you know, whoever comes in is going to have a real fight to get ahead of Latalath at the start of the season. So, like you say, it's either someone who you're going to put time and kind of effort into developing and nurturing because you think that there's real growth potential, but
who can play but would benefit from not
exactly who's ready to go in if they have to, but isn't coming as your number 1. Or, like I said, they could, you know, you could look at a different type of striker who could start straight away, but playing off Latalath or cutting in from one of the wide positions, or however, you know, Carrick wants to set that up. So I definitely think the way that Latalath finished the season has given Boro much greater leeway and much more variety in what they can do in terms of signing a forward or forwards. Whereas for much of the season, it felt like they had to sign Latalath Mark II and make sure this one worked. Well, Latalath Mark I is now working.
Excellent. Let's wrap it up there. Thanks very much, Scott. Thank you for watching or listening. Do subscribe if you haven't already and you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on your podcast platform, then leave a rating and review as well while you're at it. We'll be back next week. As we discussed at the top, if there's anything you want us to discuss in future videos or podcasts, give us a shout. We'll have some special guests coming up in the next couple of months as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your weekend.